There is a particular kind of quiet that comes from a story you have already lived through. When the lights are low and your eyes have started to close, the plot no longer asks anything of you. You know the boy will come out of the iceberg. You know the Water Tribe siblings will find him. And you know how the first firebending strike lands, and how the low hum of the score rises under it. That familiarity is the whole gift. Avatar, The Last Airbender, has a rare quality for this hour, because its world is enormous and slow and full of small sounds. The creak of a wooden ship, the wind moving across ice, the flat calm of a voice you have heard 100 times. Half awake, you do not need to follow anything. You only need to be near it. Tonight is about the episodes that fans quietly agree are the weakest ones. The hours the fandom points to when asked what the series got wrong. We are going to sit inside them, slowly, and ask what makes an episode of a nearly perfect series feel like a stumble, and whether it truly is one. That question is stranger than it sounds. The original series holds an overall rating of 9.3 out of 10 across more than 450,000 votes, a number so high that a single ordinary episode looks like a crack in something flawless. Its lowest rated hour, an early one called The Great Divide, sits at 6.8, and even the creators have called it filler, terrible. An episode one of them was simply not happy with. Yet one viewer wrote that it would have been good in any other show. Hold on to that idea, because it tells you something about the standard being measured against. Welcome to Ember, where we spend long, calm nights, inside stories you already love. There is nothing here you need to keep up with. Settle in, let the room go dark, find whatever position lets your shoulders drop, and let the familiar voices carry you down. There is a number that hangs over this entire series like a ceiling, and it is worth holding it in your mind before anything else. Across more than 450,000 user ratings on IMDb, the original run of Avatar, The Last Airbender, which aired between 2005 and 2008, sits at 9.3 out of 10. A number like that is rare, the kind reserved for shows people do not merely enjoy, but defend. When a series carries a baseline that high, something strange happens to its weakest moments. They do not simply become bad episodes, they become visible. They stand out against the surrounding brightness, the way a single dim bulb stands out in a room where every other light is burning. But when a fan sits down to name the worst episode of a nearly perfect show, they are not really measuring failure so much as distance from an unusually high standard. Keep that in mind as we go, because it changes the meaning of almost everything that follows. Consider how this consensus actually forms, because it is stranger and more human than the phrase worst episode suggests. There is no central vote, no single moment where the fandom gathered and agreed. Instead, the judgment gets assembled, piece by piece, out of scattered opinions. Screen Rant published a list titled The Last Airbender, 10 Worst Episodes, according to Reddit. And the interesting thing is not the ranking itself, but the method behind it. The outlet did not run a poll. It went digging through different Reddit threads, pulled individual picks from named users, and stitched those separate voices into something that reads like an agreement. Think about what that means. What looks like a verdict from the crowd is often one writer collecting complaints from a dozen strangers who never spoke to each other. When you look at what those strangers actually chose, the illusion of consensus dissolves almost completely. In that single roundup, 10 different episodes were each named as somebody's personal worst. The Boy in the Iceberg, The Painted Lady, Apis, Lost Days, The Great Divide, Avatar Day, The Desert, The Blue Spirits, Bateau of the Water Tribe, The King of Amashu, The Cave of Two Lovers. 10 episodes, spread across all 3 seasons, each one crowned the bottom of the series by a different person. This is less a fandom pointing at one failure than a fandom that cannot agree on where the failure even lives. One person's least favourite is another person's beloved detour, and the list only holds together because someone chose to arrange it that way. But within all that disagreement, one title keeps surfacing, and here the numbers do line up with something. The Great Divide The 11th episode of the series, and part of Book 1, is Avatar's lowest user-rated episode on IMDb. Its score is 6.8 out of 10. Sit with that figure for a moment against the series average of 9.3. 6.8, in almost any other context, is a perfectly ordinary episode of television. It is watchable, competent, kind of number 100 shows would be glad to carry. Only against 9.3 does it start to look like a wound. What makes this episode unusual is not that fans dislike it, but that the people who made it seem to agree. The series creators, Dante DiMartino and Bryan Konietzko, returned to it years later on the official rewatch podcast, Avatar: Braving the Elements, and they did not defend it. DiMartino described it, in effect, as filler, using the word filler-y. Konietzko went further and simply called it terrible, adding that he was not happy with it. There is something disarming about that. The creators of one of the most protected shows in animation, looking back at their own work and freely conceding the point the fans have been making for years. It is rare to hear the makers and the audience arrive at the same low verdict from opposite directions. Yet even the fans who name it worst tend to soften the blow in a very particular way. And this is the detail that reveals more than any other about the whole conversation. A Redditor, going by the name Paradoxius, writing about the Great Divide, put it plainly. The episode, he said, would have been good in any other show, but it is the worst episode of Avatar. Read that sentence twice, because it contains the entire logic of this chapter. The complaint is not that the episode is bad. The complaint is that it is only good in a show where good is not enough. The worst episode of Avatar is, by the fans' own admission, an episode that would have passed unnoticed anywhere else. But this is the ground we are standing on before we go any further. A show so highly regarded that its ordinary moments feel like failures. A consensus that is not really a consensus, but a collection of individual frustrations gathered up by outlets and presented as one voice. 10 different worst episodes spread across every season, agreed upon by almost no one. And at the bottom of it all, an episode the creators themselves gave up defending, which even its harshest critics admit would have been fine in any other show but this one. There is a small and pleasant irony to begin with, one that long-time fans of this series will already be nodding along to. The episode we are meant to be sitting with tonight, the one so often named the worst thing the series ever produced, is frequently miscounted. People reach for it as the 10th episode of the first book, the Book of Water, and they are off by one. The 10th episode is Jet, a tense and morally complicated hour about a charismatic freedom fighter. The episode that actually earns the collective sigh is the 11th, and it carries the title, The Great Divide. So before we even arrive at the canyon, we have wandered slightly. That feels appropriate, somehow, for a story about people who cannot agree on what happened. Let us set the record where it belongs. The Great Divide was written by John O'Brien and directed by Giancarlo Volpe, and it first aired in the late spring of 2005 on the 20th of May. It sits in the middle stretch of the first season, in that run of episodes where a show is still learning exactly what kind of show it wants to be. The episode holds a distinction that no amount of affection has ever managed to soften. Among all the episodes of the series, this one carries the lowest user rating on the film and television database that most casual viewers turn to. Its score rests at 6.8. To understand how lonely that number is, consider that the next lowest rated episode of the entire series sits at 7.3. That is no narrow miss, but a visible gap between this episode and everything else. A small canyon of its own. What makes this more than a matter of anonymous internet votes is that the people who made it agree. In 2021, the co-creators DiMartino and Konietzko sat down to talk about their own work on a podcast hosted by Dante, the actor who voiced Prince Zuko, a show called Avatar: Braving the Elements. When the conversation reached this episode, there was no defensiveness, no gentle rehabilitation. Konietzko called it, plainly, terrible, DiMartino reached for a softer word and landed on Philowe, describing it as pretty Philowe. And when Basco, playing the generous host, floated the idea that maybe a different ending could have rescued the thing, Konietzko did not take the lifeline. He said, in effect, that no, he did not think that would have saved it. Sit with that for a moment. The men who built this world, who fought for it, and shaped every frame of it, look back across 16 years and declined to defend one of their own children. That is a rare and disarming honesty. So what is actually inside this episode that so many people, creators included, would rather set gently aside? The setup is simple. Aang and his friends arrive at a place called the Great Divide, which the story describes as the largest canyon in the world. It is an obstacle, thing to be crossed. They are not crossing it alone. Two groups of Earth Kingdom travellers gathered at the same rim, each intending to make the same journey, and the two groups despise one another. They are called the Gan Jin and the Zhang, and they have been feuding for roughly 100 years. The show works hard to make you read the difference between them before anyone speaks a word of grievance. The Gan Jin appear in neat, clean white clothing, orderly and precise. The Zhang wear rougher garments made from animal skins, looser, wilder, less concerned with appearance. It is an old visual shorthand, the tidy people against the untamed people, and part of what has always troubled viewers about this episode is how thin that contrast is allowed to remain. You are given two costumes and asked to accept a century of hatred. The animation does its job. The writing, by its maker's own later admission, does not quite fill the space behind it. Here is a detail worth pausing on, because it explains why this particular hour feels so weightless within its own series. Prince Zuko does not appear. He is nowhere in the Great Divide, not in a single scene, not glimpsed on a distant ship. The credited main cast is limited to Aang, Katara, Sokka, Appa, and Uncle Iroh, and there is no Fire Nation antagonist anywhere in the plot. Consider how unusual that is for this show. Avatar, at its strongest, is a story about pursuit, about a hunted child and the wounded prince who cannot stop chasing him, and about the slow corruption and cost of a 100-year war. Nearly every memorable episode has a shadow moving somewhere at its edges. This one removes the shadow entirely. There is no villain, there is only a canyon and a quarrel, and the quarrel belongs to strangers we have never met and will never see again. That absence is, I think, the real key to why the episode lands the way it does, more than any single line or plot beat. When you take away the war, you take away the stakes that give this world its gravity. What remains is a mediation exercise. Aang, who is after all 12 years old and carries the weight of an entire vanished people, looks at these two furious tribes and makes a choice that is characteristic of him. He refuses to pick a side. Rather than favouring the Gan Jin or the Zhang, he proposes to lead both groups through the canyon together as one party. To understand the feud he is trying to heal, he splits his friends between the two camps. Katara goes with the Gan Jin, the tidy ones in white. Sokka goes with the Zhang, the ones in skins. Each is meant to listen, to learn the origin of a hatred that has outlived everyone who started it. There is something quietly admirable buried in that structure, even if the episode never manages to make it sing. Aang's instinct is the correct one, the diplomatic one, the airbender's one. He does not want to be a judge, he wants to be a bridge. Sending Katara one way and Sokka the other is a small act of faith that the truth of any old grudge is never held by one side alone, that both tribes have carried their own version of the story for a century, and both versions are partial. The problem the episode ran into, and the reason its makers wave it off as filler, is that a conflict invented from nothing and resolved among people we do not care about cannot carry the emotional freight the rest of the series earns so effortlessly elsewhere. The mechanism is sound, the stakes are hollow. You can feel the machinery of a lesson turning without the story underneath it to make the lesson matter. Yet I want to be careful here, because it is easy, especially late at night, to pile onto the episode everyone already agrees to dislike. There is a gentleness to the Great Divide that its reputation rarely acknowledges. It is a story with no death in it, and no burning village. Its worst crime is being pleasant and forgettable. In a series that so often asks its young heroes to confront cruelty and loss, here is an hour where the biggest question is simply how two stubborn groups of people might walk the same path without tearing at each other. The white clothes and the animal skins, the neat and the rough, 100 years of accumulated resentment that neither tribe can quite explain when pressed. Aang standing between them, refusing the easy comfort of choosing a villain. The creators are right that it does not work, and they are honest enough to say so without flinching. But there is a strange peace in an episode that fails so softly, that reaches for reconciliation and comes up a little short, that puts a 12-year-old at the lip of the largest canyon in the world and asks him to be fair to everyone. It is the episode nobody defends, and also, perhaps for that very reason, the easiest one to drift off inside, because nothing in it is trying to wound you. There is only the long walk down through the rock, two tribes who have forgotten why they hate each other, and a boy who would rather they simply arrive on the other side together. A correction first, because it changes how you hold this episode in memory. Many people file Imprisoned away as one of the very first things the show ever did, an early stumble somewhere near the start of the journey. In fact, it is the 6th episode of Book 1, the water chapter, not the 4th episode of the series at all. That distinction matters more than it sounds. By the time this story arrives, the show has already found its feet, which means the flaws people point to here are not the fumbling of a series still learning to walk, but the choices of a series that knew exactly what it wanted to say and said it plainly, perhaps too plainly. It first aired on the 25th of March 2005. The episode was directed by Dave Filoni, a name that would later become enormous in animation elsewhere, and written by Matthew Hubbard. Hold those two names for a moment, because there is something instructive in watching capable people build a story whose message sits so close to the surface. The craft is real. Subtlety is the thing under discussion. The plot turns on a single moral pressure. Katara meets a teenage earthbender named Haru, voiced by Michael Dow, in a village that has learned to keep its head down. Earthbending is forbidden here, and to bend is to be taken. Katara, being who she is, cannot leave that alone. She persuades Haru to use his bending in the open, to move stone in order to save an old man's life. It is the right thing to do, and it is also the trap. The act is witnessed, and Haru is arrested and imprisoned by the Fire Nation for the crime of using the gift he was born with. Think about the shape of that. Katara does not force him, she convinces him, and the convincing is built on the plainest kind of virtue, the idea that a person should not hide what they are while someone suffers in front of them. Then the cost lands on him, not on her, at least at first. At heart, it is a story about the price of visible courage under an occupation, and the episode does not trust you to feel that price on your own. It arranges the scene so that the lesson cannot be missed. What Katara does next is the part that saves the episode from being merely a lecture, gets herself arrested on purpose. She chooses the cage, deliberately, in order to reach Haru and help free him. There is something worth sitting with in that decision, because it inverts the usual logic of a rescue. It does not break in from outside. She walks in and becomes one of the captured, betting everything on the idea that she can do more good inside the walls than beyond them. It is reckless, and it is generous, and it tells you almost everything about how this character moves through the world. Now consider where they have put these prisoners, because this is the detail the writers got exactly right. The Earthbenders are held on a Fire Nation prison rig, made entirely of metal, kept out at sea. The reasoning is coldly elegant. An Earthbender draws power from stone and soil, from the ground itself, and so you strip the ground away. You surround them with nothing but iron and water, float them far from any coast, and their strength becomes useless to them. They cannot bend metal, and they cannot reach the seabed. They are surrounded by the one substance they cannot command, in the middle of the one element that is not theirs. That is a genuinely good idea, and it is worth pausing on why it works when other parts of the episode feel heavy. The metal rig makes no speech and does not announce its own cleverness. It is a physical fact that expresses the theme. The way a jailer who understands his prisoners perfectly is more frightening than any villain who monologues. You look at that structure and you understand the despair of the men aboard it without a single line explaining it to you. The cruelty is in the engineering, so the episode sits in an odd, honest place. Fans who cite it as an early low point are usually reacting to the surface, to the way the Free the Earthbender's message is delivered with both hands, to humour that has not aged with any grace. That reading is fair, but the thing underneath, the choice to imprison people on a floating cage of the one material their power cannot touch, is the series already thinking the way it would think for 3 seasons. This is a small idea about oppression, told through geometry and metal, excellent even when the dialogue around it is not. The low point and the promise are living in the same half hour, and that is a stranger, more interesting thing than a simple failure. Specific dread surfaces in the 9th episode of Book 1, and it belongs to Aang before it belongs to the audience. He panics, softly at first, and then not so softly, but he has not yet started his waterbending training. The group is still weeks away from the North Pole, and weeks, to a boy carrying the weight of Avatar Roku's warning, are not a comfort. Roku told him he must master all 4 elements before the comet arrives. So far, he has mastered 1. Think about what that pressure does to a story that has, until now, been moving with real purpose toward a single distant destination, because that is the thing rewatchers tend to notice and tend to complain about when they return to this stretch of the first season. The North Pole has been established as the goal. It is where the waterbenders are, where the training will happen, where the season is bending its whole arc. Then episode 9 arrives and does something that feels, on a rewatch, almost perverse. It slows down. It turns the highway into a country road. The episode is called The Waterbending Scroll, and it is, structurally, a road trip episode, a detour that interrupts the build-up rather than advancing it. Whether that interruption is a flaw or a feature is the question worth sitting with, and it is not as simple as the complaint threads make it sound. Consider how the episode opens its labour. Katara begins teaching Aang waterbending, which is the first time we watch the Avatar apprentice to someone his own age. While that lesson happens, Sokka is assigned to clean the mud and the bugs out of Appa's toes. That single assignment tells you what kind of episode this is going to be. The world does not turn here. Someone simply has to deal with the sky bison's feet. The show is being honest about the texture of travel, about the unglamorous middle of a long journey, a part where the destination is still an abstraction, and the daily reality is chores. The lesson itself contains one of the quietest and most consequential ideas in the early season, and it is easy to miss because it is delivered as a small frustration rather than a revelation. Katara teaches Aang a basic push and pull move. He learns it almost immediately. Here the fact does the work that no amount of narration could improve on, because it took Katara 2 months to learn that same move on her own. 2 months of solitary practice, of a girl at the bottom of the world teaching herself an art with no master and no one to correct her form. Aang absorbs it in what feels like a single afternoon. There is something painful buried in that, and the episode is aware of it even when Aang is not. He is not being arrogant. He is being what he is. The Avatar, the one for whom the elements come easily, the one the universe has arranged itself around. But watch it from Katara's side of the riverbank. She has carried this small, hard-won skill as one of the few things that were entirely hers, earned through patience nobody witnessed, and now she hands it to a boy who makes it look like nothing. The show does not underline this. It simply lets the 2 months sit next to the one afternoon and trusts you to feel the distance. The lesson goes further. Katara teaches him a move she calls streaming the water, and when Aang performs it, he adds a flourish, an unnecessary flare over his head. She tells him, in effect, that the flourish was not needed. It is a gentle correction, the kind a careful teacher gives, and it points at something about Aang that the season keeps circling. He is gifted and he is showy, and the two are not always the same virtue. Streaming works because of the fundamentals, not because of the flair. The flair is decoration on top of something he does not yet fully understand, and the episode is about to prove exactly how little he understands it, because then Aang, buoyed by how easily the small moves come, attempts a big wave, a move he has not fully mastered. The wave does what unmastered power tends to do. It goes wrong. It washes the group's supplies down the river in one impulsive reach for something beyond his level. He undoes the material security of the entire journey. This is the hinge of the episode, and it neatly turns Aang's greatest asset into the source of the group's next problem. His talent, the very thing that let him skip the 2 months of practice, is also the thing that has no brakes on it yet. Skill without discipline is a liability wearing the costume of a gift. The consequence is money, which is a wonderfully mundane thing for an epic fantasy to worry about. After losing the supplies, the group has only 3 copper pieces left of the money King Bumi gave them. 3 copper pieces, the last thread of a gift from an old friend, and it is the whole of their fortune. Then Aang, being Aang, buys a broken whistle, and the 3 becomes 2. He spends a third of their remaining wealth on something that does not even work. It is a small comic beat, but it rhymes with everything else the episode is doing. He reaches for things he has not thought through. The wave, the whistle, impulse and its bill. But the road trip finds its engine, which is need. Broke, low on supplies, the group arrives at a market, and it is here the episode reveals why the detour exists at all. At a stall, traders offer to buy Momo, calling him a fine specimen of lemur. Aang refuses. Momo is not for sale, he says, and the flatness of the refusal is the right note. There is no negotiation in him about the animals he loves, but the traders are not really traders, and the episode will reveal them to be pirates, which reframes that first friendly offer in an unsettling light. The people who wanted to buy the lemur are not people who deal in fair exchange. Then comes the object the whole episode is named for. Among the pirates' goods is a waterbending scroll. Notice how the scroll speaks directly to the wound the episode opened at the start. Aang cannot get to the North Pole fast enough. Katara had to teach herself over 2 months. Here, for sale in a market stall, the document that could accelerate everything. A shortcut to the very mastery the comet's deadline demands. The detour is not random. The road trip has led them, by way of a ruined wave and 2 copper pieces, to the exact thing their journey is about. The pirates lie about it, of course, and the way they lie is its own small comedy of dishonesty. They claim they got the scroll up north at a reasonable price. Then, when the mood shifts, they say it is free. And then, the moment they are confronted as pirates, the free scroll acquires a price of 200 gold pieces. Watch the arithmetic of that dishonesty. From up north to reasonable to free to 200 gold, all in the span of a single conversation. The value of the object floating entirely on the leverage of the moment. For a group holding 2 copper pieces, 200 gold might as well be a wall, which is where Sokka steps forward and where the episode plants the seed of its real trouble. Sokka claims he knows how to haggle with pirates. He tells Katara to watch and learn, and he begins negotiating over the scroll's price. There is a beautiful confidence in that line. Watch and learn. The confidence of a young man who has decided he is the practical one, the deal maker, the member of the group who handles the real world, while the others handle the mystical parts of it. Whether that confidence is earned is a question the episode leaves hanging at the edge of this chapter, and it is exactly the kind of small human overreach the whole episode keeps studying. Aang overreached with the wave. Now Sokka overreaches with the haggle. The road trip is, in its way, a series of people biting off slightly more than they can chew. The production context is worth holding alongside all of this, because it grounds the detour in real craft. The Waterbending Scroll is the 9th episode of Book 1. Water. The episode came from John O'Brien, one of the series' regular first season writers, and it aired during its freshman run, back when the crew was still finding its footing. It arrived, in other words, at a point in the season where a show still proving itself had to decide how much time it could afford to spend not advancing the plot. The rewatch complaint that this episode interrupts the North Pole build-up is real, and it is fair as a description of the structure. But the interruption is doing work. It is the episode where Aang learns that talent without discipline breaks things, where Katara's 2 solitary months reproach the boy who learns in an afternoon, and where the journey's whole purpose sits for sale in a pirate's hand, while the heroes hold 2 copper pieces and a broken whistle. There is a small moment near the beginning of this episode that almost no one remembers, and it tells you more about the tone of what follows than the plot ever does. Aang wakes to find that Momo, the flying lemur, has climbed inside his mouth while he sleeps, and Aang, half conscious and mildly appalled, tells the animal that he needs to be a little more sensitive to his boundaries. That is the register the episode opens in. Gentle, domestic, faintly absurd. A boy and his animals in the quiet before the day begins. Nothing about that opening prepares you for the fact that within the hour, Aang will be on trial for a murder committed centuries before he was born. Consider how the episode moves its pieces into place. Sokka has taken up a market stand in a town the story calls Chin Village, and he is selling produce, standing behind his goods like any vendor, accepting payment. A customer pays him in Water Tribe money, and Sokka takes it. Hold on to that detail, because the episode is going to make it matter in a way that is quietly cruel. There is also a jailbreak, or an attempt at one, and in the middle of it, Sokka makes a choice that the episode plays for a small pang of loss. He grabs his scrolls and his staff and leaves his boomerang behind, telling Aang that there is no time for it. For a character defined in part by that boomerang, the abandonment is a real thing, even if the episode does not linger on it. These are the fragments the story is built from, and if you notice that they do not quite cohere into a single momentum, you are already halfway to understanding why this episode sits where it sits in most people's ranking of the second book. The town has been preparing for a festival. They call it Avatar Day, and they have built for it, which is the detail I keep returning to. There is a giant float in the shape of Kyoshi, one of Aang's past incarnations, and there is a statue, an effigy, of another past incarnation, Avatar Roku. Town has invested labour and craft and time into these images. A festival implies celebration. A float implies a parade. So for a few minutes, the episode lets you believe you are watching a community honour the Avatar, which makes the turn that follows feel less like a twist and more like a trap that was always set. The turn comes from a man with signs who leads the crowd in a chant. Down with the Avatar, he cries, and the words are printed on the signs he holds, and the crowd takes up the chant, and the festival curdles. Notice what that does as a piece of construction. The same town that built the float built the resentment. The celebration and the accusation are not opposites here, but 2 faces of the same fixation. A place that thinks about the Avatar this much, that carves his likeness and marks the calendar with his name, is a place that has been nursing a grievance for a very long time, and the festival was never really a tribute. It was a wound they kept warm. The grievance itself is the strangest thing about the episode, and the most interesting, though the episode does not quite know what to do with how strange it is. The villagers accuse Aang of murder, not a murder he committed, but one committed by Avatar Kyoshi, the incarnation whose float they built, against a leader they honour with the title Chin the Great. The logic, if you can call it that, runs through the idea of reincarnation. Aang is Kyoshi, in the way the Avatar is always every Avatar who came before. And so, by their reasoning, the debt of Kyoshi is Aang's debt to pay. It is an accusation that can only exist inside the metaphysics of this particular world, and there is something genuinely eerie in it. The notion that a soul can be held to account across the gap of death and rebirth That guilt might be a thing you inherit without your own consent. The episode raises this and then, largely, uses it as a plot engine rather than a question. That gap between the idea and the handling of it is, I think, part of why the episode frustrates people who want it to be more than it is. To clear his name, Aang is told he must stand trial and he must post bail. He offers to pay. He offers Water Tribe money, the same currency Sokka took at his stand without a second thought, and the town refuses it. They will not accept it. Here the earlier detail pays off in the small dark way this episode traffics in. The money was good enough for produce and worthless for justice. The town will take your coin across a market counter and reject it across a courtroom rail. Whether the episode intends this as commentary or simply as a way to raise the stakes, the effect is the same. Aang cannot buy his way out. He has to prove something instead, and proof, in a case about a killing that happened before living memory, is a difficult thing to gather. This is where Sokka steps forward as the story's designated detective, and the episode reaches back into his history for his credentials. He claims to have solved a mystery before, back home, a mystery he calls the missing sealed jerky. His reasoning in that old case, as he tells it, was that the culprit could not have been a polar leopard, because a real polar leopard, heavy enough to sink deep into any soft ground, would have left tracks pressed far deeper than the shallow ones that were found. The tracks were too light for the weight. So the animal was innocent, and the real thief turned out to be an old man from the same village. It is a genuine piece of deduction, physical and specific, weight against impression, and Sokka is proud of it. The show is inviting you to see him as a mind that reads the ground for what it can and cannot bear. But the great crime he cracked was the theft of preserved meat, is the joke. But the method underneath it is the tool he brings to Chin Village. The crime scene here offers its own piece of stone evidence. The mayor shows the group a footprint set into rock, attributed to Kyoshi herself, and he tells them the killing happened at sunset, 370 years to the day before the events of the episode. Notice the precision of that. To the day. The town has kept the anniversary with the exactness of a liturgy, which returns us to the idea that this is a place organised around its grievance, a place that counts the years. Notice too that the physical trace, the footprint in the stone, is what the case rests on. The same category of evidence Sokka used at home. The ground remembers, or seems to. Whether it remembers the truth is the question the episode is circling. Aang is the one who finds the crack in the account, and it is worth walking through his observation slowly, because the episode does something honest with it that I admire. He notices that the temple and the statue of Chin were carved from the same stone, the same material. The statue, he reasons, was built after Chin died, because you do not raise a monument to a man who is still alive to see it. If the statue came after Chin, and the temple shares its stone with the statue, then the temple, too, postdates Chin, which would mean that Kyoshi, who lived in Chin's time, could never have set foot in the temple, because the temple did not yet exist when she walked the earth. It is a clean deduction, geological and chronological, stone dated by stone. Here is the honest part. The episode does not let it be a triumph. Aang's reasoning undercuts the mayor's account. It pokes a hole in the official story, but it does not fully prove his innocence. Poking a hole in one version of events is not the same as establishing another, and the episode knows the difference. A lesser story would have let the clever boy solve everything with one clever look. This one lets him be right and insufficient at the same time, which is closer to how evidence actually works. So the case is not closed. It cannot be closed here. The group decides they must travel to Kyoshi Island to gather more evidence, to go to the source, to the place that bears her name and might hold her truth. The episode splits itself in this decision, sending the search elsewhere, while Aang's fate stays behind. In one of the smaller beats of that split, Katara speaks to a girl on the island named Coco and tells her plainly what has happened, that Aang is jailed and that he stands accused of the murder of Chin by way of Kyoshi. It is a moment of exposition. Yes, one character catching another up on the plot. but there is a weight to hearing it said aloud to a child, the accusation restated in its full, strange shape. A living boy imprisoned for a dead woman's act. Said simply, to someone who was not there, it sounds as unreasonable as it is, and perhaps that is the point of putting it in a child's ear. John O'Brien wrote the episode, and Lauren McMullen directed it, and it went out on Nickelodeon on the 28th of April in the year 2006 as the 5th entry in the Book of Earth. The episode is often named among the weaker episodes of that book, and I understand why, though I want to be fair about the reasons. The mystery it builds is thin, and the town of Chin Village is a single note held a beat too long, replaced with one grievance and one gag, and not much else. But the machinery of it is more careful than its reputation suggests. A boy scolds a lemur about his boundaries, a vendor takes coins that will later be refused, a detective reads weight in the depth of a track, and a temple is dated by the stone it shares with a statue. The parts are honest, even when the whole does not quite hold them together. Consider the position the show finds itself in at the opening of its 3rd book. The season before had ended in something close to catastrophe. The very next full episode, the 2nd of Book 3, and the 42nd of the whole series, an instalment called The Headband, begins not with recovery, but with a scene that keeps the wound open. Fire Lord Ozai stands before his son and praises him. He tells Zuko that he is proud, that Zuko's loyalty was tested, and that Zuko did the right thing. The thing Ozai is praising is the capture of the traitor, which is to say the capture of Iroh, Zuko's own uncle, the man who had followed him across the world. There is a particular cruelty in hearing a father congratulate his child for a betrayal, in hearing the language of pride and duty wrapped around an act that any honest heart would call abandonment. The show opens the episode in that register on purpose. Then it deepens the discomfort, rather than releasing it. Zuko asks his father a direct question. He wants to know why Ozai told the court that Zuko was the one who killed the Avatar. Ozai's answer is not reassurance. He implies that Zuko's glory would turn to shame if it should turn out that Aang was still alive. Weigh that for a moment. The lie that has restored Zuko to his father's side is a lie that could reverse at any instant, and Ozai has arranged things so that the shame, if it comes, will fall on Zuko rather than on himself. The prince has gotten everything he thought he wanted, and the episode shows us in its first minutes that the ground beneath that homecoming is not solid. This is heavy material. It is the kind of scene that would sit comfortably inside the darkest hour of the series. Now watch what the episode does next, because this is the pivot that fans have argued about for years. The moment that earns the chapter its subject. The scene changes to Aang, Sokka and Toph, and the emotional temperature drops out entirely. They are hiding in caves inside Fire Nation territory. They have disguised Appa by shaping clouds around him so that his silhouette will not give them away from the sky. Their most pressing problem, the thing that drives the plot forward, is that they are tired of hiding in caves and eating cave hoppers. The group takes a vote. They decide to steal Fire Nation clothes and blend in among the civilians, rather than keep skulking in the dark, eating whatever crawls past. 1 minute the series is watching a father teach his son that love is conditional and glory is a trap. The next it is watching 3 teenagers decide to go shopping for disguises. The whiplash is real, and it is deliberate, and whether it works is a question worth sitting with, rather than answering too quickly. Some fans have called the timing tone deaf, and it is not hard to see why. The finale of Book 2 had left the audience shaken, and here, almost immediately, the show pivots into what is essentially an infiltration comedy. The stakes on the page are enormous. The stakes in the scene are whether the heroes can pass as ordinary Fire Nation people at a market. To a viewer still carrying the grief of the previous ending, that shift can feel like a betrayal of the mood, as though the story has forgotten what it just put us through. There is a version of this criticism that is entirely fair. When a series earns a certain seriousness, it takes on a kind of debt to that seriousness, and light material that follows too closely can read as the show cashing out that debt too cheaply. But there is another way to read the same choice, and the episode gives us the material for it if we are willing to look. The likeness is not empty. Every comic beat in the disguise sequence is built on the fact that these children are behind enemy lines, and one mistake could end them. Aang wears a headband, the object that gives the episode its name, specifically to hide the arrow tattoo that marks him as an airbender, the very thing that would identify him instantly as the avatar the whole nation believes is dead. The disguise is funny, but the reason for the disguise is mortal. Comedy that sits on top of genuine danger is a different thing from comedy that exists in a vacuum, and the headband is doing the former even when it looks like the latter. The clearest illustration of this comes through Katara and a single small object. She puts on her Fire Nation disguise, and she keeps wearing her mother's necklace. Sokka points out the obvious problem, which is that the necklace is plainly Water Tribe, and gives the whole game away. On the surface, this is a throwaway moment, a bit of sibling correction inside a montage. Underneath it is a quiet statement about what these characters are being asked to do. To disappear into the Fire Nation, they must set aside the things that mark them as who they are. For Katara, the necklace is her mother, the woman the Fire Nation took from her. Asking her to hide it is asking her to hide her grief in order to survive among the people responsible for it. The show does not underline this. It lets the joke carry the weight, and the weight is there for anyone who wants to feel it. Aang, for his part, throws himself into the disguise with an enthusiasm that is entirely in character. He invents a cover identity. He decides to be Kuzan, and he builds a small backstory around the name, claiming to be a friend who had visited the Fire Nation 100 years ago, which is of course technically true in the strange arithmetic of a boy who was frozen for a century. He tells the others to stay flaming, which is his idea of blending in, a piece of invented slang that is charming precisely because it is trying so hard. There is something touching in watching Aang, who carries the heaviest burden any character in this story carries, treat infiltration as a kind of game. It is how he copes. The playfulness is the show being honest about how a 12-year-old would actually move through a situation this large, not a failure of seriousness on its part. The plot tips into its central engine, almost by accident. Aang is still wearing a Fire Nation school uniform that he took as part of the disguise, and because of it, a teacher mistakes him for a truant student and marches him off to a Fire Nation school. This is the moment the episode commits fully to its lighter mode. Aang, faced with a room full of enemy children and an adult who expects him to behave a certain way, improvises. He claims to be from the colonies to explain why his manners are wrong. He bows to the teacher. When he needs to explain why he will not remove his headband, he says there is an embarrassing scar underneath, which is a lie built to protect the true secret beneath it, the arrow that would end everything. The teacher gives him a choice that is really no choice at all, between the name Kuzan or being called a mannerless colony slob, and Aang takes Kuzan. The comedy here is genuine, and it is worth granting that the episode is simply funny, that the humour is not a flaw to be excused, but a quality to be enjoyed. Inside the school, Aang makes a friend. A classmate named Onji is kind to him. She compliments his headband, the very object that is hiding his identity, which is a small and pleasing irony, and she warns him that she has a possessive boyfriend among the popular kids at the school. It is ordinary teenage material, the stuff of any story about a new student arriving somewhere unfamiliar. That ordinariness is exactly the point the episode is making, without fuss. These are children on both sides. The Fire Nation, which the series has shown us mostly as an engine of conquest, is also a place where kids go to school and complement each other's accessories and worry about jealous partners. The show has spent 2 seasons teaching us to see the Fire Nation as a monolith of threat, and here, in the middle of a supposedly frivolous episode, it complicates that picture by simply letting us sit in a classroom. Meanwhile, the other thread of the episode has not gone away, and its persistence is what keeps the headband from collapsing into pure filler. Zuko sneaks past a guard to secretly visit his uncle in his cell. He has captured Yoro, has been praised by his father for it, and now, alone, he goes to see the man he betrayed. The facts do not tell us what passes between them, and so neither will I, but the mere existence of that visit tells us something. Zuko has everything he wanted, and still he creeps through the palace to stand outside his uncle's prison. Set that image beside the classroom, and you begin to see what the episode is actually built out of. Two children, in a sense, are hiding who they really are. Aang hides behind a headband and a false name so that he can walk among the enemy. Zuko hides behind his restored honour and his father's approval, and cannot stop himself from returning, in secret, to the person he wronged. The episode intercuts a boy pretending to belong somewhere he does not, with a boy who has finally been told he belongs, and finds that it is not enough. That, I think, is the strongest defence of the tonal choice, and it is a defence the facts support, rather than one I have to invent. The lightness and the darkness are not two separate episodes stitched clumsily together, they rhyme. The school storyline is about disguise, about performing an identity that is not yours in order to be safe. The palace storyline is about the same thing dressed in grander clothes, the prince performing the role of the loyal son, while some truer part of him goes creeping toward the cell where his real teacher sits. The show placed a comedy about hiding your true self right after a finale about a boy who chose to hide his, and it did so, I would argue, with more intention than the tone-deaf reading allows. None of this fully answers the objection, and it would be dishonest to pretend that it does. Timing is its own kind of meaning. Even a well-made light episode can land badly if it arrives before the audience is ready to laugh again, and a viewer who felt the ending of Book 2 as a genuine loss is entitled to find the immediate turn to school uniforms and invented slang jarring. The criticism is not wrong. What I would offer instead is that the jarring quality might be the point, or at least a defensible byproduct of a real ambition. Life does not schedule its comedies to follow decently after its tragedies. Grief and absurdity arrive together and interrupt each other, and a story that refuses to segregate them into tidy tonal zones is making a claim about how the world actually feels. By the end of the episode's first act, Aang has done something that captures the whole tension in miniature. He tells Katara and Sokka that he has enrolled himself in a Fire Nation school and intends to go back the next day. When Katara pushes back, he defends the decision by saying he is learning about the Fire Nation. To prove it, he shows her a picture of Fire Lord Ozai and a portrait he has made of the Fire Lord out of noodles. Hold those two images together for a moment. The same episode that opened with Ozai, real and menacing, teaching his son that love is a test to be passed, now gives us Ozai rendered in noodles by a cheerful boy who has decided that the way to fight a nation is to understand it. The show is not confused about which Ozai is the true one. It is showing us that a child's answer to an unbearable enemy might be to sit in that enemy's classroom, wear a headband over the mark of who he is, and turn the tyrant's face into a joke made of food. Whether you find that tone deaf or brave may depend less on the episode than on where you were standing when the season before it ended. Be precise, before anything else, about which episode this next chapter actually concerns, because getting it wrong changes how you hold the rest. The 11th is The Day of Black Sun, Part 2, The Eclipse, a heavy consequential hour of invasion and revelation. The episode we are actually talking about is the 7th, called The Runaway, and it is a quieter, stranger thing. It first aired on the 2nd of November, 2007. Giancarlo Volpe directed it, and Joshua Hamilton wrote it. Keep that straight, because the confusion is itself part of the story, how fans remember this stretch of the show, misfiling episodes, blending arguments, carrying a general unease about a season that was asking its characters to behave in ways some viewers did not recognise. The premise of The Runaway is a scam. Toph has discovered that her earthbending gives her something close to a superpower in the ordinary world of small crime, a seismic sense The ability to read vibrations through the ground lets her feel the movement of a pebble under a shell in a street game. She plays these hustlers at their own table, Fire Nation men running a con, and she wins every time because she is not guessing. She knows. Money comes easily. This is where a certain kind of viewer first began to shift uncomfortably in their seat, because the Toph they'd come to love was proud, yes, and blunt, and allergic to authority, but she was not obviously a thief, and watching her turn her gift into a grift felt just like a costume the writers had put on her, rather than a thing that grew from inside her. Consider what the seismic sense means as a storytelling tool, because the episode is built on it. Hers is a form of perception that lets Toph know the truth of physical things others cannot see. She feels lies as changes in a heartbeat. She feels the pebble she is not supposed to be able to locate. Yet the plot asks us to believe that this girl, who senses so much, who reads people through the earth, does not sense the danger she is walking her friends toward. That tension between how perceptive Toph is and how reckless the episode needs her to be is one of the themes that fans pointed at when they said her characterization rang false here. The conflict that forms the episode's spine arrives through Katara. She finds a wanted poster among Toph's belongings, and she confronts her about it, and the argument that follows is the emotional engine of the whole half hour. Toph snaps. He tells Katara, in effect, that Katara is not her mother and has no standing to give her orders. It is a cruel line to aim at Katara specifically, and the show knows it is cruel, because Katara's mother is the absence around which so much of her character is organised. Toph accuses Katara of being too motherly toward the group, of hovering and managing and nagging. Katara, for her part, accuses Toph of being reckless, out of control, a danger to all of them. That is the shape of it. One girl says, "You smother us." The other says, "You will get us killed." Here is where the honest disagreement among viewers lies, and it is worth sitting with rather than resolving too quickly. The argument is, on paper, a good argument. Such friction naturally develops in a found family under pressure. The youngest and the most maternal member colliding over exactly the trait each one cannot stand in the other. But a number of fans felt that the writing reached the fight before it had earned it, that Toph was made harsher than she had been, and Katara more controlling than she had been, so that the collision would spark. When a conflict feels imposed rather than grown, an audience senses it, even when they cannot name it, and that vague sense of wrongness is what a lot of people carried out of The Runaway. The beats are all correct. The feeling underneath them is what some viewers say did not ring true. Sokka sits inside this too, though more lightly. It is Sokka who finds the wanted poster that names Toph the Runaway, the phrase the episode takes for its title, and the moment turns on Toph's reaction to it. She is not frightened by the bounty offered for her capture. She is delighted. A price on her head reads to her as a kind of recognition, proof that she is formidable enough to be hunted. And that delight reveals the loneliness underneath the bravado. To be wanted, even by people who want to cage you, still to be wanted by someone. But it also deepens the unease, because a girl who treats a bounty as a compliment is a girl the plot can steer into danger without much resistance, and the audience can feel the steering. The reconciliation is where the episode makes its boldest, and to some, its most questionable move. Katara does not resolve the fight by asserting authority or by softening into apology. She resolves it by joining Toph. She agrees to run a bigger scam, the biggest one yet, in which the two of them will pretend that Katara is turning Toph in for the bounty. The motherly one and the reckless one become partners in the very recklessness they were fighting about. There is something genuinely lovely in that idea, the notion that Katara meets Toph on Toph's ground rather than dragging Toph onto hers. There is something that made fans wince, because it means the argument is settled not by either girl learning the other was right, but by both of them agreeing to do the dangerous thing together. The dangerous thing is a trap. The scheme, the fake handover for the bounty, is not their scheme at all. It has been set by the assassin group has been calling Combustion Man, a silent figure who kills with a beam of focused destruction from his brow. He uses Katara and Toph as bait, drawing them into a position from which he intends to kill Aang. What looked like two girls pulling a con was two girls being conned, walked into a killing box by someone patient enough to let them think they were the clever ones. It is Katara's quick thinking that gets them out, a detail the episode is careful to give her, so that the character accused of being merely the worried mother is the one whose mind saves them all. There is a neatness to that reversal that you can admire and distrust at the same time. Katara is criticised for being cautious and controlling. The plot then puts her caution to work as the thing that survives an assassination attempt. It is almost too tidy a rebuttal, the episode answering the argument it staged by proving one side right. Whether that lands as vindication or as the writers grading their own homework depends a great deal on how much you trusted the fight to begin with. The ending steps away from all the noise. Toph, with Katara's help, writes a letter to her parents. She has run away from home, and the guilt of that has been sitting under everything, under the scams and the bounty and the delight at being wanted, and now she puts it into words on a page and sends it. Katara helps her write it. The girl who said you are not my mother is guided, gently, by the one she said it to, in the act of reaching back toward the mother and father she actually left. It is a small, unshowy scene, and it is the one most viewers agree the episode gets right, because the emotion in it is not imposed. It grew. The fight may have felt engineered. The loneliness under the bravado did not. So the case against the runaway is really a case about trust, about the distance between a well-constructed conflict and a felt one. The facts of the episode are sturdy. Toph cheats, Katara confronts her, they fight, they reconcile through a scam. The scam is a trap, Katara saves them, Toph writes home. None of that is in dispute. What some fans dispute is whether the people doing those things were quite themselves while they did them, and that is a harder charge to answer than any question of plot, because it lives in the gap between what a character does and who you believed they were. There is a specific vindication a fan feels when the people who made a thing finally admit that a piece of it did not work. For years, the argument over which Avatar episodes fell short belonged entirely to the audience. Then, in June of 2021, both men who built the series sat down and, in effect, agreed. DiMartino and Konietzko appeared as guests on Avatar, Braving the Elements, the series' own rewatch podcast, hosted by Dante and Janet Varney, the voices of Zuko and Korra. And on that episode, the conversation turned to the one accusation that has followed the series since it aired. Filler. Think about how rare that setting is. The hosts were not neutral critics. They were performers who had lived inside these characters, sitting across from the creators who had written them, all of them looking back together at work that was more than a decade old. It would have been easy, in that room, to defend everything, to smooth over the rough patches with nostalgia. Instead, DiMartino conceded the point directly. He named the episode fan's name most often. The most famous one is The Great Divide one, he said, which I'll give them. I'll say that's pretty filler-y. That phrase, I'll give them, is worth sitting with for a moment. The language of someone acknowledging a debt. The fans had been right, and he was paying them their due. The Great Divide is the 11th episode of Book 1, The Water Book, and it first aired in 2005. If you have watched it, you likely remember the shape of it more than the substance. Aang and the group arrive at an enormous canyon and must help two feuding tribes cross it. There is a resolution of a kind, but the episode sits apart from the larger story, a self-contained detour that touches almost nothing before it and almost nothing after. Konietzko was blunter than his partner. Where DiMartino softened his admission with a shrug and a coined word, Konietzko simply called the episode terrible. He did not reach for the diplomatic register. The way he described his own dissatisfaction is more interesting than the verdict itself. We've got this big gap, he said. It's a big empty hole, yet it is filler. Consider the strangeness of that observation. A canyon is a void in the earth, a literal absence, a place where the ground should be and is not. Konietzko, looking at the episode he built around it, heard the metaphor turn on him. The setting was an empty space, and the story that filled it felt empty too. Yeah, he added, I was not happy with it. What makes this exchange more than a simple mea culpa is what happened next. The hosts, doing what generous fans do, tried to rescue the episode. They suggested that perhaps a different ending might have saved it, but the problem was located in one place and could have been repaired. It is a comforting thought, one that preserves the idea that the bones were good and only the execution slipped. Konietzko would not accept the lifeline. Nah, he said, I don't think that would have saved it. He rejected the easy revision. In his own estimation, the failure was not a matter of a wrong final beat that a better one could have fixed. The problem was deeper, structural, present in the whole rather than in the ending. There is something clarifying about a creator who refuses to let himself off the hook. It would have cost Konietzko nothing to agree with the hosts, to say yes, a stronger close might have redeemed it, and to move on with everyone feeling better. He chose the harder honesty instead. That honesty is exactly what makes the rest of his praise for the series trustworthy. When a person is willing to call his own work terrible, you believe him when he calls the rest of it good. But Konietzko did not leave the assessment at terrible and stop there, and this is the part most easily lost when the quotes get passed around. He qualified the criticism. Even in the episodes he was not happy with overall, this one included, he noted that there were always moments that I really liked. Hold both of those truths at once, because they do not cancel each other out. An episode can be filler, can be a big empty hole, can be terrible on the level of its architecture, and still contain small passages that its own maker looks back on with genuine fondness. The failure is real. The moments inside it are also real. Neither one erases the other. That, in the end, is the gift this podcast gives to anyone who has ever argued about the series' weaker hours. The fan hatred of The Great Divide was never a misreading. It was not the audience failing to appreciate something subtle. The men who made it saw what the fans saw, felt what the fans felt, and said so out loud, in a warm room, among friends. Weakness in a beloved thing is not a betrayal of that thing, but simply part of it. And the people who built Avatar seem to have made their peace with that long before the rest of us did. When head writer Aaron Ehas joined Avatar, The Last Airbender, the series did not yet exist in the way we now think of it. Nickelodeon had greenlit 5 scripts. That was all, 5 scripts, and a mandate that Ehas later described plainly. His job was to make those 5 strong enough that the network would order a full season. Consider what that meant for a show now remembered as a benchmark of serialized storytelling in American animation. It began not as a season, not even as a guarantee of a season, but as an audition. 5 chances to prove the idea could hold. The network answered that audition with caution rather than confidence. After the initial 5 scripts, Nickelodeon did not order a full run of 20 episodes. It ordered 13. So the creative team found itself in a peculiar position, building the opening of an epic while operating under the constant possibility that the epic might simply stop. When you are given 13 episodes and told nothing about the rest, you cannot yet build the long machine of foreshadowing and payoff that serialization requires. You have to make each episode earn its own keep and leave a door open at the end in case someone with the power to continue the story is watching. That is exactly what they did. The team deliberately ended the initial 13 episode order on the episode called The Blue Spirits, treating it as a strong closing note, a piece designed to persuade Nickelodeon to order more. It was a pitch dressed as an episode. It worked, because Book 1, Water, eventually ran the full 20 episodes, airing on Nickelodeon from February of 2005 to December of the same year. But the shape of that early order left fingerprints on the season. The stretch of episodes made before the writers knew they had room to breathe carries a different texture than the stretch made after, and once you know where the 13 episode line fell, you can almost feel the moment the ground steadies beneath the show. This is the production history root of something fans have argued about 2 decades. The early Water episodes lean, more than any later part of the series, on the self-contained detour, a monster, a village, a moral tidy, enough to be wrapped up in a bow by the closing minutes. Aang and his friends arrive somewhere new. A problem presents itself, the problem is resolved, and the world resets for the next stop. It is a perfectly ordinary way to build a children's adventure show, and it is also precisely the mode a serialised epic has to grow out of. The early season leans on those standalone stories, because the writers were working under an order too short to promise the payoffs serialisation depends on. Ambition was never the problem. The most infamous of these detours is The Great Divide, the 11th episode of Book 1. It has become a kind of shorthand for the season's weakest instincts, and unusually, the people who made it do not disagree. On that rewatch podcast, Avatar, Braving the Elements, co-creator Michael Dante DiMartino called it, in his words, pretty fillowy. His fellow co-creator, Bryan Konietzko, went a step further. He called the episode terrible. He said, in effect, that he was not happy with it, and that even a different ending would not have saved it. That is a rare thing to hear from creators about their own work, and it marks the honesty with which this team looks back. The audience agrees with them, too. The Great Divide sits as the lowest rated episode of the entire series on IMDb, at 6.8, the only episode in the whole run to fall below 7. O'Brien wrote it, and it has carried the weight of being the series' designated low point ever since. But the interesting thing about this chapter is not that a mediocre episode exists. Every long series has one. The interesting thing is how the creators separate the merely weak from the genuinely load-bearing, because not every episode accused of being filler actually is. Consider The King of Amashu, the 5th episode of Book 1, one of those original 5 scripts from the audition. Fans have long pointed to it as filler, a detour with no forward motion. On the same podcast, DiMartino and Konietzko defended it, and defended it firmly. They called it super crucial, and their reasoning was structural rather than sentimental. The episode introduces King Bumi, a character who returns and matters. What looks like a standalone stop is in fact a seed. The King of Amashu and The Great Divide split along a clean line. One appears self-contained, but quietly plants something. The other is self-contained all the way down. Hold those 2 episodes side by side, and you begin to see the season's real story. It is a season learning, in real time and under commercial pressure, which of its detours should carry weight, and which are simply detours. Early on, the balance tilts toward the tidy and the disposable, because that is what a 13-episode order rewards. Then, quite specifically, the balance shifts. Critics tend to locate that shift in 2 episodes near the end of the season. The Storm, the 12th episode, and The Blue Spirit, the 13th, the very episode chosen to close the original order and argue for more. This is the turning point, where the series stops wrapping each story neatly in a bow and starts letting its threads hang, letting them pull. The Storm gives Zuko a tragic backstory through flashback, transforming the pursuing villain into something closer to a wounded person, and it complicates Aang's heroism rather than affirming it. The low-stakes, self-contained mode does not vanish overnight, but here you can watch the show reach for serialised psychological depth and take hold of it. The stories stop resetting the world at the end, they start changing it. There is a quiet symmetry worth sitting with. The episode the team chose as the strong closing note of their short order, The Blue Spirit, is also the episode critics name as part of the series' creative awakening. The very piece built to convince the network to keep going is the piece where the series became the thing worth keeping going. The audition and the arrival happen in the same breath. Whether that was design or the natural result of a talented team pouring everything into their final chance, the effect is the same. The season that began with 5 scripts and a maybe ended by proving it deserved to become something larger. So when a listener remembers Book 1 as uneven, front-loaded with Monster of the Week, detours before it found its rhythm, that memory is accurate, and it has a cause that is not carelessness. The early Water episodes lean on standalone stories because they were made before anyone knew the story would be allowed to continue. The Great Divide sinks lowest because it is the purest example of the disposable detour, filled by the admission of the men who made it. The King of Amashu survives the same accusation because it was doing structural work, and The Storm and The Blue Spirit mark the moment the series grew past the mode entirely, the moment it stopped asking permission to be serialised and simply became so. The Hated Cluster and the Celebrated Turn are not separate seasons, but the before and after of a single order of 13 episodes, and the line between them is exactly where the network finally said yes. There is a kind of episode that television does not always know what to do with. It stops the machinery of plot. Nothing is captured, nothing is destroyed, no destiny moves a single inch closer. For a story as tightly wound as Avatar had become by its third season, an hour that simply lingers can feel, to a certain kind of viewer, like a betrayal of momentum. This is the reputation The Beach carried for a long while after it first aired on the 19th of October, 2007. It was the episode that dared to do nothing, and a portion of the audience held that against it. The chapter you are inside now is about how that judgment did not last. Consider first what the episode is. Plainly, it was written by Katie Matilla and directed by Joaquim dos Santos, and it belongs to that category of story which a later retrospective from CBA would place, half in defence and half in explanation, under the heading of filler. The word is doing a great deal of work there, and not all of it fair. What CBR noticed was that the episode departs from the normal business of plot advancement to focus, purely and without apology, on character. That is the accusation and the achievement in a single breath. Nothing happens. Everything is revealed. So the reappraisal is the interesting thing. As of this year, 2026, The Beach holds an average user rating of 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, which is not the number a disposable hour of television tends to keep across 2 decades. TV Line, looking back across the entire run, ranked it among the 15 best episodes the series ever produced, and the phrase they reached for was that it is the episode that truly completes the puzzle of the Fire Nation teenagers. Look at what that means. The scattered, dangerous, difficult young people who had been pursuing our heroes for 2 seasons were, until this hour, mostly weapons. Effective ones, but weapons. The beach is where they become people, and a story does not survive on the strength of its weapons alone. To understand why the episode had to be quiet, it helps to sit with how it opens, because it does not open in stillness at all. Before the beach, before the vacation, there is a vision. Fire Lord Ozai stands before his son and tells him, and here the words are exact: "I am proud of you, Prince Zuko. You slayed the Avatar." It is the sentence Zuko has organised his entire young life around hearing. Approval, the end of exile, spoken aloud by the one voice that ever mattered to him. Then the vision curdles. The Avatar is not dead. He is alive, somewhere, and Ozai orders his son to find him and, in the language of the moment, to end him. The prize dissolves the instant it is grasped. The father's pride was conditional all along, resting on a corpse that refuses to stay a corpse. Hold that opening in your mind, because the rest of the hour is the long exhale after it. A boy who cannot be at peace is sent, of all places, somewhere designed to produce peace. The premise is almost comically gentle. Ty Lee is delighted. She tells the others how good it will be to spend the weekend on Ember Island, that it will be great, in her words, to hang out on the beach and do nothing. That is her whole wish. To do nothing, in the sun, among friends. It is the plainest desire a young person can have, and it lands strangely coming from her, because these are not ordinary young people, and the vacation is not really a vacation. Azula names the truth of it without softening. This is a forced vacation. Their father, she explains, wants to meet with his advisors alone, without anyone else in the way, and so his daughter and her companions have been removed from the board and set down on a beach, like pieces swept off to the side of a game still in progress. There is something quietly wounding in that, though Azula delivers it as fact rather than complaint. They have been sent away not because they are cherished, but because they are, for the moment, inconvenient. The same conditional love that opened the episode in Zuko's vision is operating on all of them at once. They have simply learned not to look at it directly. The place itself belongs to Mai. Her family, she says, has a house on Ember Island, and they used to come every summer when she was a child. The line is small and easy to pass over, but it colours everything that follows. This is not neutral ground, for one of them at least. The beach's memory, a return to a version of herself that existed before whatever hardened her into the flat, guarded young woman she has become. You do not get to say a thing, like every summer, when I was a child, without the sentence, carrying a whole vanished world behind it. They are met at the house by two elderly caretaker women, and the caretakers speak the way places like this always seem to speak in stories, in language that sounds like folklore and turns out to be instruction. The beach, they say, has a special way of smoothing even the most ragged edges. They tell the young people to keep an open mind. The words are a small blessing and a small warning at once. Ragged edges is a generous phrase for what these four are carrying, and the promise that a beach could smooth them is either wisdom or wishful thinking, and the episode spends its length refusing to tell you which until it is ready. There is a detail here that I find myself returning to, because it does a great deal with very little. Toph, who has come along in the larger sweep of the season, warns Aang to cover up while he is swimming. She is worried that someone might see the arrow tattoos that mark him unmistakably as the Avatar, and as an airbender, the last of his kind. The quiet joke, the thing that makes the moment land, is that they are surrounded by walls. There is no one to see. The threat she is guarding against is not present, but the habit of hiding does not switch off, simply because the danger has stepped away for the afternoon. That is the whole psychology of the episode, compressed into a single exchange. These are children who have been at war so long that safety itself feels like a trap they have not yet identified. Even inside walls, on a beach built for doing nothing, the reflex is to conceal what you are. Now you can see why the reappraisal happened, and why the early impatience with the episode misread it. The complaint was that nothing advances, but the entire war, the entire tragedy of the Fire Nation, is a story about people who are never allowed to simply be young. What the beach advances is the audience's understanding of who is fighting the plot, not the plot itself. Azula, who states the cold fact of her own disposability without flinching. Mai, whose flatness turns out to be the residue of summers that ended. Ty Lee, whose deepest ambition is an afternoon of nothing. Zuko, carrying an opening vision in which his father's love arrived and dissolved in the same sentence. Set them on a beach, take away their missions, and you finally get to see the shape of the wound underneath the weapon. This is why the chapter belongs where it does, in this larger story about hatred and its half-life. The beach was, for a stretch, a disliked episode, dismissed as filler, resented for its stillness. Then, time did what time occasionally does. The number on IMDb settled at 8.5. The retrospectives came, and some later rankings placed it among the finest episodes the series ever made, as if it were the piece that completes the puzzle. The very quality that once read as absence, the refusal to advance, was reread as the point. Far from a gap in the story, it was the part that made the rest of it hurt. There is a lesson in that for how we assign the word hated at all. The first reaction is not a verdict. The writer crafted an hour with no battle in it. Joaquim dos Santos directed a vacation, and the immediate response from a plot-hungry audience was mild disappointment. But the episode was playing a longer game than its early critics were, and the beach, exactly as the two old caretakers promised, had a way of smoothing the roughest edges. Given enough time, it smoothed the characters. It also, eventually, smoothed its own reputation. Keep that open mind the caretakers asked for, because the next time you hear that a thing was hated, it is worth asking when it was hated, and by whom, and whether the judgment ever went back to check its own work. The beach was sent away on a forced vacation of the audience's regard, set to the side like Azula and her friends, deemed inconvenient to the momentum everyone thought they wanted. Then, without capturing or destroying anything, it came back as one of the best things the series ever did. There is a particular pleasure in the moment when different sources of judgment agree, and a different, sharper interest in the moment when they do not. This chapter is about both, because the question of which Avatar episode is most hated turns out to have more than one answer, depending on where you go looking, and the disagreements are as revealing as the agreements. Start with the single hardest number to argue with. On IMDb, every episode of the series carries a user rating assembled from thousands of individual votes, and one episode sits at the bottom of that pile. It is The Great Divide, an early episode of Book 1, holding a 6.8. That is the lowest score of any episode in the series. What makes the figure remarkable is not only that it is last, but by how much. Screen Rant reported that the next lowest rated episode on the same platform sits half a point above it. Think about what that gap means. Roughly half a point separates The Great Divide from every other episode, and every other episode is bunched together above it. It stands alone at the bottom, full step down, while the rest of the series crowds the doorway above. You might expect a score like that to be the verdict of an anonymous crowd alone, kind of thing the people who made it would rather ignore. That is not what happened. In 2021, its co-creators appeared on Dante Basco's podcast, Braving the Elements, and they did not defend the episode. DiMartino called it, in his own words, pretty fillily. Konietzko was less forgiving and called it terrible, and he added that a different ending would not have saved it. That last remark is the interesting one. It closes off the usual escape route. When a creator dislikes an old episode, they often locate the failure in one fixable place: a rushed finale, a studio note, a deadline. Konietzko refused that comfort. The problem in his telling was the whole thing, not the landing. So the aggregate data and the makers themselves converge on the same episode. Now bring in the fans and watch the picture complicate. Screen Rant also assembled a compilation with a different method, drawn not from star ratings, but from Reddit discussion, titled The Last Airbender, 10 Worst Episodes, according to Reddit. The Great Divide appears there too, among the 10 episodes users named as the series' worst, with one commenter writing that Sokka and Cutter are, in that user's phrase, 100% out of character in it. That is a specific and telling complaint. The complaint is that it makes two beloved characters behave in ways that do not fit the people the audience believes they know. Dullness is not the charge. A rating measures how much you liked an episode. A complaint like that measures something closer to betrayal. Here is where the sources part ways. That same Reddit source list did not crown The Great Divide as the single worst. The top of the list, the episode fans named as the very worst by vote, was The Boy in the Iceberg, the series premiere, the first episode of Book 1. Sit with the disagreement for a moment. The IMDb rating data and the fan poll are looking at the same show and returning two different names. The numbers say The Great Divide is the low point. The poll says the premiere is. Both cannot be the answer to a single question, which tells you the question itself is doing quiet work underneath. A crowd voting star by star, episode by episode, weighs each one in isolation. A poll asking people to name the worst invites a different kind of thinking, memory and reputation, and the willingness to speak up. Aggregate ratings and fan polls do not fully agree, and the premiere is where that seam shows most clearly. There is a second seam, and it runs the opposite direction. Consider The Cave of Two Lovers, the second episode of Book 2. Two independently published rankings name it among the series' worst. One is Screen Rant's Reddit poll list. The other is a separate worst episodes list from Looper, produced without reference to the first. Two outlets, two methods, and they land on the same episode, each of them pointing at the same flaw, a romance subplot they found predictable and awkward. That is real convergence. When two people arrive at the same conclusion by different roads, the conclusion earns a little more weight. yet the numbers refuse to cooperate. Despite living on multiple worst episode lists, the episode carries an 8.1 on IMDb. That is not a low score at all. It sits above the series average. So you have an episode that opinion writers and poll respondents keep filing under the series' failures, while the broad voting crowd quietly rates it well. The listicles say worst. The ratings say better than most. Both are describing the same episode, and both are, in their own terms, accurate. What emerges from holding these sources side by side is not a single villain, but a map of how disagreement works. The strongest case, the one where the ratings, the polls, and the creators all point the same way, belongs to the Great Divide. It is the rare instance where the data, the discourse, and the makers agree. Around it, consensus phrase in both directions. The premiere is despised in polls, but not in ratings. It is despised in ratings articles, but not in the ratings themselves. My own reading, offered as opinion, is that this is what a fair verdict actually looks like. Not a clean number, but a set of measurements that mostly agree and occasionally do not. And the places where they diverge are exactly the places worth watching, because they show you that most hated is not one thing, but several methods of listening to an audience, and the audience does not always say the same thing twice. There is a moment in the life of any long story where its makers look back and try to name what they were doing before they knew how to do it. For DiMartino and Konietzko, the two people who built Avatar: The Last Airbender, that moment arrived years after the fact. On a rewatch podcast called Braving the Elements, released in the late spring of 2021, they sat down, episode by episode, with the series they had already finished, and they let themselves be honest about the parts fans had spent more than a decade calling filler. What they said is more interesting than a simple confession, because it contains both an apology and a defence, and the two do not cancel each other out. The apology is aimed at one episode in particular. The Great Divide, an early episode of Book 1, is the one DiMartino named as the one fans cite most often when they reach for the word filler, and he did not fight the label there. He said of that episode that it is pretty fillerly. Konietzko did not soften it at all. He called it terrible and said plainly that he was not happy with it. Yet notice what he did next, because it matters to the whole shape of this idea. Even while disliking the episode, he reached back into it for the specific things he still admired: the canyon crawlers, the scene of the story being told around the campfire. The creator can dislike an hour of his own work and still find inside it a handful of images worth keeping. That is not indecision, but what it looks like to see your own past clearly. The numbers agree with the creators, which does not always happen. On IMDb, where users have rated every episode for years, The Great Divide sits at 6.8. That is the lowest score any episode of the series carries. It is not lowest by a narrow margin, the way a race can be decided by a single stop. The next lowest episode in the entire run sits half a point clear of it. Think about what that gap means. It means the audience did not spread its disappointment evenly across a dozen weaker hours, but concentrated almost all of it onto one, leaving everything else standing well above. The show, by the crowd's own reckoning, has a single soft floor and then a long, high plateau. So it would be easy to draw a straight line from this and say the lesson was obvious. Standalone episodes, the ones that pause the march of the plot to tell a self-contained story, are the weak ones, and a wiser show would simply stop making them. But that line is wrong, and the wrongness of it is the real subject here. Consider Zuko alone, the 7th episode of the second book. It is a standalone that does not advance the larger plot in any urgent way. Structurally, it is built from the same materials as those earlier episodes people called filler, a quiet detour into one character, while the main engine of the story idles. Yet it holds a rating of 9.6, and it is in fact the only episode in the whole series without Aang, Katara, or Sokka in it at all. The three young people the series is ostensibly about are simply not there, and it is one of the finest hours the series ever made. Hold those two facts beside each other and let them sit. The lowest rated episode is a standalone. One of the highest rated episodes is also a standalone. The format cannot be the thing that failed, because the same format also produced something close to perfect. Whatever went wrong in that early hour of book 1, it was not the decision to step outside the plot for a while, but something smaller and more specific, a matter of what that particular detour was about, and whether anyone in it was worth the time. The problem was never the pause. The problem, when there was a problem, was an empty pause. This is exactly the distinction DiMartino was trying to protect on the podcast, and it is worth hearing him make it in his own terms. He pushed back against the blanket use of the word filler for everything that was not plot machinery. He said, in effect, that fans had started treating any episode that did not 100% move the overall plot forward as suddenly a filler episode. And he found that baffling. He asked, essentially, what is this filler? And answered his own question by saying it is all part of the story. There is a real argument buried in that mild frustration. A story is not only its plot. The hours that seem to go nowhere are often the hours where the people inside the plot become real enough that we care where the plot takes them. Zuko alone advances nothing and reveals everything. That is no contradiction. It is how character works. This is where the growth becomes visible. If you are willing to see the early stumbles, not as failures to be forgiven, but as an apprenticeship being served. The series did not learn to abandon the standalone. It learned to fill it, to tell the difference between the empty pause and the full one, between a detour that exists because a slot in the schedule needed filling, and a detour that exists because there was something inside a character no plot beat could have reached. By the second book, it could take its most closely guarded figure, remove the heroes entirely, and hold an audience for a whole episode on the strength of one person's memory. The muscle that built Zuko alone is the same muscle that was still weak in The Great Divide. It simply grew. You can see where that growth was heading by looking at how the series chose to end. The third book, The Book of Fire, ran 21 episodes and aired across most of a year, from the autumn of 2007 into the summer of the following year, on Nickelodeon. When it reached its conclusion, the series did not dole the finale out week by week, the way it had spent 3 books training its audience to expect. Suzin's Comet arrived as a single 4-part block, broadcast on one night, the 19th of July, 2008. Everything the series had learned about serialization, about carrying weight forward and paying it off, was gathered into one continuous evening. The series that had once padded a 3rd episode with a story it did not need had become a show that could hold 4 episodes of consequence together without a single seam showing. That arc, from the soft floor of the first book to the sealed finale of the 3rd, is the honest shape of how this show became what people remember. Not a straight ascent, and not a clean one. There is a genuinely weak hour near the beginning, and the creators know it, and they said so out loud, without hiding behind excuses. But there is also, only a book later, a standalone that proves the early weakness was never structural, only particular. The format was innocent the whole time. What changed was the makers' command of it, their growing certainty about which quiet hours were worth spending, and which were merely being spent. So when you hear the word filler used as a verdict on this series, hold it lightly. Some of it is fair, and the 2 people who made the show would tell you so themselves about one episode in particular, but most of it mistakes a young story finding its feet for a story that did not care. The Great Divide is what learning looks like from the outside, before the lesson has landed. Zuko alone is the lesson landed, and the 4-part night that closed the whole thing is what a storyteller does once he finally trusts the audience and himself to stay in one place long enough to feel the ending arrive. There is a kind of hatred that only love can produce, and everything covered here returns to that single fact. The episodes people rank lowest in Avatar are not failures of a lesser show, but the moments when a story about balance, about war and childhood, and the slow work of becoming who you are, reached for something and did not fully close its hand around it. a comedy episode that lingers too long, a bending competition that stops the war to sell an idea, a cave of two lovers that asks its heroes to trust a feeling when the audience wants them to trust a map. These are the places where ambition outran execution, and the fans noticed because they had been taught by the series itself to expect more. Consider what that means. The most hated episodes are hated in proportion to how much the good ones earned. A weaker series would have made weaker mistakes, and no one would have cared enough to argue about them for the better part of 2 decades. What looks like a list of the worst is really a record of how high the ceiling sat, measured from below by the few times the ceiling was missed. So the arguments continue, in comment sections and rewatches, and quiet late nights, long after the credits on the final episode have gone still. Somewhere, a boy in an iceberg is still waiting to be found, patient in the blue dark, while the world above him keeps deciding, again and again, which of his stories it could not forgive. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.